Hello, and welcome to the Palestine Center. My name is Holly Larson. I'm an intern here, and will be introducing Ms. Nadia Hijab and moderating our question and answer session. Before I begin introducing our speaker, I'd like to remind all audience members to please turn off their cell phones and all electronic devices. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome Nadia Hijab, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Palestine Studies, to address the war on Gaza and public opinion. This lecture is the second lecture in our series, Shifting Dynamics Within the Quest for Peace. As a whole, the 2009 intern lecture series seeks to provide audience members with a critical analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and current prospects for peace. Today's lecture will cover the humanitarian impact of the war on Gaza and what effect the war has had on international public opinion and state responses to the conflict. Nadia Hijab is Senior Fellow at the Institute for Palestine Studies, an independent nonprofit research organization and a leading resource on the Arab-Israeli conflict. Ms. Hijab is a frequent public speaker and media commentator, author of the book Woman Power, The Arab Debate on Women at Work, and co-author of Citizens Apart, a portrait of Palestinians in Israel. She was editor-in-chief of the London-based Middle East magazine before moving to New York to join the United Nations. In 2000, she established her own consulting business on human rights, human development, and gender. She has served as co-chair of the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation and is a past president of the Association of Arab American University Graduates. Ms. Hijab will be speaking for about 30 minutes, after which we will open the floor to however long we have for audience questions. And now I'd like to welcome Ms. Hijab to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly, and I'd like to really welcome the intern, to thank the intern program of the Palestine Center for inviting me to speak. I think it's a great program. It gives a lot of people a lot of exposure to the issues, and of course the interns of today are the speakers and the leaders of tomorrow. So thank you for having me here. So I'm going to do three things today, and it's going to be offering rather a broad sweep on the issues. First, I want to talk about why the war on Gaza is so different from other events during the 60-year course of this Arab-Israeli conflict. Second, I want to talk briefly about the actual conditions in the occupied territories. And third, I want to discuss the shifts in state policy and public opinion, and to look at kind of the different forces that are shaping the future and opportunities for intervention by different actors. So first, what is the significance of the war on Gaza? Why are we still talking about it, months after it happened, when there's been so much conflict and war during the last 60 years? I think future historians of the Arab-Israeli conflict will identify certain defining moments when the balance of power shifted between the Israelis and the Arabs, starting from the War of 1948, through the War of 1967, which led to the Israeli occupation of the rest of Palestine and other Arab lands, and through to the present time. I think the war on Gaza, which of course took place in January 2000 and December 2008, January 2009, will probably stand out as the most defining moment of all. We might even start to speak of the conflict before Gaza and after Gaza. Now, in almost all other conflicts, and during most of the course of this conflict, Israel has had the upper hand, militarily as well as in terms of framing the debate, framing the discourse on this conflict, which is actually a very crucial dimension in the way it's perceived. There have been some notable exceptions to Israel's supremacy. One was the 73 Arab-Israeli war in October 73, and Yasser Arafat's speech at the UN in 1974. This ushered in a period, for a variety of factors, a period of Palestinian strength. Not military strength, to be sure, but in the more important areas of diplomacy and framing the debate. This period of Palestinian strength lasted, I would say, until 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, dispersed the Palestine Liberation Organization throughout the world, and really crushed it for a while. Another exception to Israeli supremacy came in 1987 with the first Intifada, which was almost fully nonviolent. Intifada means uprising, and it was the first uprising against Israeli occupation in the occupied territories, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. This period of Palestinian strength ended with the Oslo Accords of 1993. And in fact, in hindsight, one could say that the Oslo Accords constituted, to all intents and purposes, a Palestinian concession of defeat by the Palestine Liberation Organization. The years after 93 were marked by the steady dismemberment of the Palestinian national movement, and also of what had been a very powerful international movement of solidarity with the Palestinians until then. And one indication of Palestinian weakness was the fact that Israeli settlement continued during the entire peace process, between 1993 and 1999, when Palestinians and Israelis were actually signing peace agreements. Israeli settlement continued, and they more than doubled the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And this was during all Israeli governments, whether Labour or Kadima or Likud. So in a sense, the impact of the Israeli war on Gaza this past winter echoes that of the first Intifada of 1987 in some ways. The first Intifada presented the conflict to the world in really unmistakable terms. It was a defenseless population rising up against an overwhelmingly superior occupier in a struggle for justice and for human rights. Now, in Gaza, in spite of all of Israel's attempts to frame the conflict as being between two military forces, two military adversaries, i.e. Hamas and Israel are equal and they're struggling, they're in a conflict and a war. In spite of all Israel's attempts to frame the Gaza war as a battle between two military forces, and this attempt included excluding the news media from Gaza, but the reality came through in the starkest possible terms. For one thing, Israel didn't succeed in framing this battle because everyone who is in any way a consumer of the news media, of any news media, knew that Gaza had been under siege for the 2 years preceding the Israeli assault. The siege had been a major news story since it started in spring of 2006 after Hamas won parliamentary elections in January and after it formed the government. And it had become much tighter after the Hamas takeover of Gaza in June 2007. So here's this besieged population exposed to the most destructive arms that a modern army can throw at them, including illegal weapons such as white phosphorus. Israel's violations of international law during its war on Gaza were very many, and they range from, the indiscriminate use of force against civilians to preventing medical teams from reaching the wounded. But the American Jewish professor of international law, Richard Falk, who's documented actually a lot of the violations and analyzed them because that's his job, as a professor of international law, plus he's the special rapporteur of the UN on the conflict. He's gone to the heart of the issue. He says that actually Israel's decision to attack Gaza violates international law because there was a ceasefire. There was a different way of keeping Israel safe, if that's the rationale, from Hamas rockets, a ceasefire. And that ceasefire between Hamas and Israel was holding until Israel broke it on November 4th, 2008, with an attack that killed 6 Hamas guerrillas. As a result, Richard Falk says